Cool. All right. Welcome, everyone. I'm David Hincapie. I'm joining you again. This is the second of three in this series. And today we're going to be talking about preparation for getting loans and bonds. And what this is really building business credit, right? So I'm going to be using a program that's called Money Smart. We got some more. I'll be admitting them. There we go. Joining. And two more. I can see right here when it's telling me that people are in the waiting room. So the Money Smart program, I'm going to tell you a little bit about it since I don't think I mentioned it last time. It was 2 weeks ago, so I don't remember exactly everything I said. The Money Smart program was created by the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation as a financial literacy program. General is for consumers, for citizens. All right, and they have for teenagers, for college students, for adults, for older persons. And then with the SBA, they created the Money Smart for Small Business program. And that was created, I think, 6 or 7 years ago. It's been around for nearly a decade. And it's got 13 modules. The 13 modules cover 13 topics that are related to small businesses, important things for small business. And you can just take them off the shelf and they're freestanding. And today we're going to use the freestanding one. That is, you don't have to do them in any particular sequence. Today we're going to do the building credit one. Normally, this is a program that's done in person. We'd be in a classroom. We'd have maybe a whiteboard or a chalkboard. I would be projecting some slides and you would have the workbook and you'd be going through that. In this case, I don't ask people to have the workbook, though I tell you where you can go get it so you can review all of this. And also there's going to be a recording. So let's get started into this. I'll be showing you where you can go get them a little bit later in the thing. So let's get started on this. Let me get my presentation up. Got my slides here. Money Smart for Small Business. And let's get to the sharing screen. Share screen. There it is. All right, off we go. Okay, so why is this important? You're going to see some of this stuff in there repeated, but this is very important because you're going to need credit sooner or later in your business. If you're in a construction business, you're going to be looking at surety bonds, perhaps. Well, not perhaps. You're definitely going to need a surety bond. If you don't know what it is, I'll give you a quick definition of what that is. A surety bond is a kind of insurance contract. Whoever hires you might require you to have a surety bond, which means you have paid a surety bond agent a sum of money, and they agree to pay to the person who hired you, right, to the entity that hired you, in case something goes wrong with the execution of the contract, you doing the work. So it protects the person who contracted you in case you are unable to do the work as the contract required. So there's a sum of money. Naturally, getting this bond is going to depend on the financial health of your business and the strength of your business and the credit, right? The business credit that you have, which is a component of that is your personal credit. And obviously for loans, they're going to look at your business credit as well. So that's what a surety bond is. It's going to require good business credit, and obviously a loan is going to require that as well. So, all right, we're going to skip through this. This is the stuff that we'd be doing if we were in person. So here's the learning objectives. This is the things that we're going to go into here, which is understand how the personal and business credit relates to your business, identify what goes into personal and business credit scores, learn how to establish and build strong personal business credit histories, and understand how lenders and others may use your personal and business credit information. So from the beginning, and I'll be reminding you, this is just scratching the surface of the topic. I'm giving you some basics here At the end, you can go to the Smart Money Smart for Small Business website, download the participant guide, read it again. And sorry, let me silence my computer here so no alerts interrupt us. And continue learning some more, right? And we can get in touch and we can talk personally if you have some questions as well. Next thing here. Now, here's some of the learning objectives. We want to see how the credit reporting services may benefit your business, strong personal and business credit histories for better financing terms, all the stuff, the learning objectives are just the stuff that you need to know and why it matters. So I want you to stop for a moment and think, or as I'm talking here, stop and think, like, what do you currently know about your about credit and how credit is scored and granted and everything like that? And normally we do this what do you know form, like a pre-survey, but we're going to skip through that since we're not doing this in person. I'm hoping later in the year we get to do things in person again. So the big picture, credit reporting in your business. All right. So we already talked about this. You're going to be seeking financing. You're going to be managing your debts and obligations, and you're going to assess and reduce risk before starting a business relationship. Now, I want to talk about risk and uncertainty. This is actually a concept that goes back a very long time to the 20s. There was an economist named, it's called Knightian. His name was Knight, K-N-I-G-H-T. I forget his first name. And the concept is Knightian uncertainty. There's a difference between risk and uncertainty. Risk is when you know potentially what are the bad things can happen, right? Risk is when you have some knowledge of the situation. So what are the risks in driving a car too fast? You know what could happen. What are the risks involved in taking up a new hobby that like cycling? You have an idea of what the risks are. They're pretty known risks. If you're going to be on the roads, you better have a bright yellow helmet and a bright yellow vest and a lamp and everything like that, because the risks involve being hit by a car, being hit by other riders. What are the risks? Being caught in the rain, it makes the road slippery, things like that, right? You understand what the context and the environment is, and you can quantify what the unwanted things are in a way, in an actuarial table, in the way that insurance companies do. Insurance companies charge you for your car insurance, say, based on actuarial tables that tell them something. It tells them, famously, the highest auto insurance rates in America are for men. I think it's like under age 25. It's the highest risk. And they can quantify it because they have decades of data of car accidents and who was involved and who was at fault in the car accidents. So we know that if we're insuring 1,000 young men age 16 when you get your license to 25, we know that in a typical year, out of those 1,000, some large number that we don't like, I don't know, maybe 250 are going to be in an accident. We can quantify it. Uncertainty is different. Uncertainty is when you have no idea. There's no way to quantify it, right? It's simply an unknown. You have an element of uncertainty when you're starting your business. And you have an element of risk. Risk is something that you can quantify, that you can measure, that you can give a reasonable quantification of, a certain kind of contract. There you go. But how well your business is going to do? Well, there's an element of uncertainty. There were a lot of people with really great business ideas who started their businesses in January 2020. Or let's say November 2019. Before we even heard of the novel coronavirus. Life is uncertain in this way, and they didn't see this virus coming, and look at what happened. So that's uncertainty, something you just can't predict, you can't quantify. Now, I'm talking about this in the context of credit because this is going to be important in assessing and reducing risk before starting a business relationship. but I wanted to make that distinction for you. Risk and uncertainty, two different things. So credit. Look, credit is, we can approach it in this very naive sense. It comes from a Latin word, credere. Well, that's actually the Italian verb for it, which means to believe. I don't know what the Latin word actually is, but Italian comes from Latin. And credit is based, is the ability to borrow money based on what someone believes about you, right? Do they believe, and the thing that we're really getting at is, do they believe they're going to be repaid? Ultimately, that's what it's about, right? Now, this is important because many businesses need credit because their cash flow is uneven. They don't make the same amount of money every month. And there will be months, perhaps 2, 3, 4 periods during the year in which cash flow is a little bit low. You still have expenses, you still have costs. And if your cash is low, you need access to, the language we use is liquidity, meaning cash. You need access to cash so that you can meet some of these costs and expenses. And then you know that you're going to be making some money later, right? If your business is seasonal, and many businesses, in a way, you could say every retail business is seasonal. They make a lot of money during the Christmas, shopping season. So in a sense, every business is seasonal, retail businesses, right? So that's what credit is, okay? Now, personal versus business credit history. I have seen different numbers for this, but it doesn't matter which one is correct. It's going to surprise you. What do you imagine is the size of the revenues of a business before a bank that is extending credit to it no longer requires personal guarantees from like the owners of a business? If it's a closely held business, it's a corporation, but there's only 4 or 5 shareholders or something like that. People usually say to me something like a couple of million. And actually, talking to lenders who have lent in the middle markets, they've told me no, it's higher. We're talking hundreds of millions. Anything lower than that, the bank wants to know that you personally are signing your name and making yourself personally responsible for paying back this loan. Now, they know that for certain size loans, you're just not going to have enough assets should the loan go bad. So if the corporation is not able to pay it and you're the sole shareholder, they know you don't have enough assets to make it, but you have enough assets that they're going to take. And that is going to be an incentive for you to work very hard to pay back the loan, which is why personal credit history matters to a small business, because it is intertwined. It cannot be disentangled from the business credit history. And Ken, our resident banker here, if you want to jump in on any of this at any moment, please do. So we enter the waiting room. There she is. Okay. Now, okay, so that's what I want to mention, why they're so intertwined. All right. So what you want to imagine is that with credit, it's going to go in this kind of cycle here, right? One thing leads to the other, which leads to the other, and always goes back. Let's say you can get access to some financing. Well, the financing then allows you to acquire or create inventory. Let's say if you're selling products, or to produce the service that you're selling. Now, if you produce the service, then you're also going to be able to purchase necessary equipment and materials, or the labor, right, to produce the service that you're going to be providing. And this is going to produce income for you in the business, revenues. That from that, you're going to have some working capital, right? And the better you are at managing your working capital, the easier it is going to be for you to access your financing, right? So you can jump in at any point in this cycle, just begin at any point, right? Let's say you were just gifted some money from someone in the family and you purchased necessary equipment and materials. Okay, so now you're going to have some working capital. What do you do with this working capital? Do you manage it well? Do you turn the working capital and the equipment and materials and the labor into a product or service that people actually want to buy? And when they buy it, what do you do with that money? Right? If you do it well, if you manage this working capital well, then you're going to have access to more financing. If you have access to more financing, then you can acquire or manufacture more inventory or produce more of the service. And then you're back at the point where you jumped into the cycle, right? Or maybe you start this cycle at accessing financing. Maybe, this is a requirement for some people. Some people are willing to do it, some are not. You have a house, it's got quite a bit of equity. You've got a business idea. So you do a second mortgage on the house. That's the financing. That's your access to the financing. Then you acquire, you manufacture the inventory, or you produce the services. You purchase the necessary equipment and materials for this. You manage that working capital, and you're back at the point where you access the financing. Anywhere in this cycle, you can jump in depending on your circumstances, right? But the point is, you're going to be going in that cycle constantly. And we're going to talk about this we can talk about this more in the cash flow management, but that's a different module, in that you have to understand your cycle of turning assets into money that you then turn into more assets that you sell, and then you turn into money. Your inventory, for example, is going to be an asset if you're selling stuff, right? That's an asset that sits on your balance sheet as an asset, where you're going to turn that asset into money by selling it, or by using it to create something that you sell, right? That's going to give you money. Then you go back, and how fast you do this cycle and how you manage this cycle is going to affect the profitability of the business, right? And the ability to access credit to keep the cycle going. Now, I'll get to this in a moment, a little bit later. You don't always have to get credit, outside financing, for expansion or for doing this or for doing something else or everything. Sometimes you can self-finance, but that's all a question of how you manage your working capital. So there's a personal and business credit spectrum, right? So we're going to see here the importance of business credit is on the x-axis there, on the horizontal axis. On the vertical axis, the y-axis, we've got the importance of the business credit, right? And so in the very beginning, here's the point. In the very beginning, there's no business credit. The business is new. And the business being new is, I would say, anything that's less than 3 years. Even if you've been selling steadily, and I would say it's less than 3 years, because a typical source of financing is going to want 3 years minimum of tax returns, right? Of results, of financial results, before they start looking at you seriously as a potential borrower for their loan product. Ken, am I right? Anything to say about that?
You're right.
Okay.
I'm not jumping in a second. Don't worry.
Okay. So you're going to need 3 years, right? So before 3 years, you're new. You're new, because if you go anywhere and try to get credit, they're going to say, you don't quite have enough. It looks strong. It looks good. Come back in a year if you've only been around for 2 years, Now, you can get credit if under the 3 years, if you have something you can put up for collateral, if you're willing to do it, if you have it and you're willing to put it up. I used to work with veterans a lot of veterans, they come out after 10, 12, 15 years. It's a steady job. It's very hard to get fired when you're in the military. And if you manage your money well, they have a house, and they have a house it's going to have a lot of equity in it. And so then they get out and they would come to us, where I used to work, the nonprofit where we mentored veterans who were starting their own businesses. And 2 years into it, they'd say, wow, okay, so I think, I'm doing all right, but I need financing and I can't get it. Well, no, you can get it, but you have to be willing to put up this house. Oh, no, I can't do that. My husband won't agree to that. My wife won't agree to that. Oh, okay. Well, then that's a different decision. That means that doesn't mean you can't have access to it. You have access to it, but you got to have skin in the game, which is a common phrase in this. So in the beginning, it's very important to have good personal credit because there's no business credit yet. So the business is now 3.5, maybe 4 years old. You're going to go for some financing. What's your personal credit score? That's going to matter. That's probably one of the biggest. I think that's the biggest thing. One of the two biggest things that's going to matter, right? We're going to talk a little bit about that a little bit more later. Now, only, as it says here, what I said before, only very large and sophisticated businesses may not need to rely on business owners' personal credit history. Very large, because by the time the business gets that big, that business has so many assets that can be attached, right? You can put a lien on, that can be part of the security for the loan, that they don't have to worry about the personal credit of the business owners, right? If it's a closely held corporation. Okay. So we have this case study that they use in the booklet here, right? EcoGrow Solutions. Right. Now, have you applied for business loans or lines of credit in the past? Now, what information, now stop and think for a moment here if you haven't, what information and documentation did they ask from you from the, during the loan application process? And did they tell you if you were going to need to check your credit history? Certainly, yes. I've never heard of it not. All right. So a personal credit report. Some of you may not have seen one. There are a lot of adults, and I've seen surveys on this. There are a lot of adults who've never seen their own personal credit report. In some cases, and I used to be one of those, in some cases, it's because we know we're not going to find anything good there. That's the situation we're in. Like that used to be me when I was younger. I was like, I don't want to look at it. I know what it's going to say because I know what I've been doing and I know what I've been not doing. So it tells, what information for those who have never seen one. It tells who you are, how much debt you've had, and how long you've had it. It shows how frequently you applied for credit, right? How much of it are you using? In other words, you have this much available to you, say with a credit card, right? This is your limit, but you're only using this. And it talks about your timeliness of payments, and it talks about negative information such as bankruptcies and foreclosures. It's all there. You can get one for free. Some law was passed a long time ago. I think it was in the 90s that said everybody is entitled to a free credit report, and it's called freecreditreport.com. And the law was passed, and it said that the credit reporting bureaus had to give one free credit report per year. That'll come up later again. And so they just, as a consortium, created this freecreditreport.com, and you can go there, put your information in, and you'll get a free credit report there. You'll have to know what's on it as well and get some help in learning that. So the major consumer credit reporting agencies are Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion, right? What kind of information? So name, social security number, current and previous addresses, date of birth, telephone number, all this stuff is going to be in here. Okay. What does not appear on a personal credit report? Checking and savings account balances. They don't have access to that. Income, medical history, purchases made with cash, check, or debit card. Debit card is essentially cash. A check is not cash, but it doesn't go through, it's not credit, right? So business account information, any personal demographics information, driving record, marital status, doesn't have any of that stuff, okay? Credit score. This is a number that helps lenders determine your credit risk. Now, frequently used score models are the FICO score or the Vantage score. Let me explain what this gets at. As I said, with insurance, they can insurance companies can, with actuarial tables, can quantify the likelihood of a thing happen if there's enough data to create that table. So we have a lot of data on drivers in the United States of America since states started issuing driver's licenses. And we have a lot of information on accidents. And so you can make a prediction using probability, mathematics, and statistics to say this percentage of male drivers age 16 to 25 are going to have this many accidents every year, right? And it varies from region to region. You can refine the model. You can say for the whole United States, but it might be much lower in one part of the United States, much higher in another part of the United States. So you make a predictive mathematical model that says this percentage. Well, the FICO score models are similar. They're going to have information like, well, and I'll give you an anecdote about the weakness of these, but we're stuck with it. They're going to say something like people who have only had one late payment in the last 3 years and have this much income based on their tax returns and have at least a high school diploma. Let's make it simple. And borrow this percentage, like the monthly payment will be this percentage of their monthly gross income. People who check those boxes are going to default on the credit, are going to fail to pay it back. I don't know, 3%. 3% of the people who fit that are not going to pay it back. We can refine the model even more. We can say 6% of the people are going to have 2 late payments. 3% are going to have 2 late payments and then just it'll completely default. Right? And so we have these models. That's a very simple one. Right? But they can refine them with all the data, like the information that's in the credit score, and assign a number to you, right? Assign a score, right? Goes up to 800. And based on that score, the lending institution, right, whatever it is going to say, we're only going to lend to people who have at least a 650. If it's say a FICO score or a Vantage score, they use that's another one. Right? It has a little R for registered trademark because it is a model created by one of these entities, and they have registered it. They have that name is Vantage score is their name for it. FICO is their name for it. Okay, so those are the scores. So that means the lenders are going to plug you into the computer, all your data, all the information they have from the credit report, and it's going to spit back out a score, and they're going to say yes or no. All right. Many lenders also use their own credit scores. Before FICO and Vantage existed, banks would do their own kind of scoring. Right? Let's taking the example of banks. They would do their own thing. Now, these are not perfect. I had a conversation with a nonprofit lender when I still lived in California, and meaning they were not a bank, and they used to do a lot of microloans. So that's in $50,000 or less, $50,000 or less. And their chief of lending, who's no longer with them, he moved on to other things, a different company. He was looking over data close to their 20th anniversary. They were approaching their 20th anniversary. And he saw this pattern. And so he looked further in the data and he established a pretty solid correlation, like indisputable, really. He was showing it to me, which was that if a person was current on their car payment and on their revolving credit, so their credit cards, even if they had a foreclosure or a bankruptcy, but not recently, they were going to pay back the loan. The default rate on those was less than 1%. Now, if you have that on your personal credit, a default, foreclosure or a bankruptcy, that really kills your credit score. It's very low. It really lowers it. And normally such a person would not be able to get a loan because the lending institution just follows the model, says below here, we will not lend. So because they have that in their credit score, it's a low score. But he said, well, this doesn't predict it, right? This credit score is not a good predictor. I have found a flaw in it. There are a lot of hypotheses for that. We talked about it a few times, and we don't really know. We don't know why that's the case, but that was 20 years of data on lending, and they discovered this. And so they changed their lending policy. They're able to do that because they're a smaller nonprofit. Well, for a nonprofit, they're big, but nonprofits relative to the size of banks are very small. Banks are unlikely to ever do this because it's just too much work. They don't want to bother with it. Let me go back here. But anyway, my point in telling you this is that these scores are just these models using data predicting whether or not you're going to repay the loan. These models are not perfect, but we're stuck with them. They're not totally imperfect either. They're pretty good predictors, and we're stuck with them because the lending institutions use them.
So I'll interject.
Yes.
So I'm just curious, how many of you are monitoring your credit on a regular basis? Wave your hand in the reaction.
Oh, yeah.
How many of you are actively monitoring your credit?
There's 1, 2, 3.
Oh, shoot.
4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All right.
Okay. So from a banking standpoint, credit history is super duper important. It's also up for interpretation. So my name is Ken White. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the board chairman for the Maryland Black Chamber of Commerce, but I'm also a senior vice president of a bank. And I've worked for many banks, been in banking for close to 40 years. Yep, 40 years. And so I've worked for big banks, small banks, regional banks, national banks, and everybody looks at credit histories different. So one key thing is when you're talking to your lender, find out what they're looking at or what they're asking for. Some have a minimum credit score that they won't do business with, some don't. Almost all of them will say to you, regardless to what their policy is, you cannot approach them and have unanswered to items on your credit report. You can't have collection items that were not paid or addressed. You cannot have foreclosures that were addressed or whatever. Whatever's on there, there has to be something that you did to either address it and or explain it. So know that. So you should never go to a bank and the banker tell you what's on your credit report. Mm-hmm. When you go to a bank, you should be in a position to tell them what's on your credit report and be able to explain up front what's on there. Life happens. We all know it. People lose their jobs. People get sick. We understand. But the credit report kind of gives us a glimpse at your character. How did you behave or how did you respond to a setback in life? i.e., did you run out and file bankruptcy and not pay anybody in the world? Or did you contact folks and work out a payment plan and come to some type of agreement with people? When you're approaching a bank, banks are not just giving out money for free. There's all, if I do a bad loan, I can lose my job. So I'm basing my credit decisions, and my boss is basing credit decisions, and our credit department is basing credit decisions based on the risk that David talked about earlier that's associated with providing this credit for you. If you come to a bank and it looks like you've never paid anybody that you ever borrowed money from, ever, and you say, well, how come you won't give me the money? because it looks like you haven't paid anybody who's ever borrowed money you've ever borrowed money from. And I relate it to, a lot of times I relate what's going on in business is just like in personal. If you have a cousin that didn't pay auntie back and didn't pay mama back and didn't pay your brother back, are you gonna raise your hand and give them money when they need to borrow money for their car payment? No, you're gonna say, dude, you've never paid nobody back. And that's basically what your credit report is saying to folks. Will you pay me back? Historically, have you paid people back? How have you handled your business? That's my soapbox. I'll get off. But it really does tell a story, and it's always amazing to me that people don't know what story is telling.
Yeah. 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 So here's some more details about the FICO score and Vantage score. The typical score range goes from 300 to 850. Vantage score, FICO explains it this way. And so this is very important for you to know, right? Sometimes I've talked to people who think that applying for credit, too many applications for credit is going to ruin their credit score, right? That has happened a couple of times with the EIDL loans. Yes, it's true. Your credit score, 10% of it is based on new applications for credit. If you do too many of them, then it's going to reduce the score. But you got to keep in mind, if you do too many of them outside of a window, right? If what is it? I think it's 40. Is it 45 days, Ken? For most places where it won't penalize you if you're, like in other words, if you're out shopping for a mortgage for a house, right? That takes time. You may go here, you may go there, you may go wherever. You're just shopping for the one thing. You're going to have a lot of hits on the credit, but if it's within a certain window, it won't count because that's just part of the process of going out and doing the shopping, right? So you're not going to be penalized for that. But outside of a window, if there's too many of them, then it's going to affect you. And I just don't, I forget, is it 30 or 45 days? I don't remember exactly, but typically applying for the same type of thing, like you go like for a car loan, a couple of different places, it's not going to hurt you if you do that within this window, say 30 days. That would be a reasonable one, So what actually matters is you could see that the most important thing is your past payment history, right? What Ken was saying is if you haven't ever paid anybody back, why would anybody trust you? Remember where credit comes from. Credit comes from to believe. Why would they believe you're going to pay them back, right? Outstanding debt. This is important because even if you have a stellar, perfect record of paying everything back on, or you're still paying it back, but you're on time all the time. If you have too much debt, then that creates risk for the lender. Because if you're operating too close to what you can handle financially, right, then any disturbance, right, any problem in your revenues might create a problem for them if they extend credit to you, right? So that's why there are limits on what percentage of your revenues, say monthly, they're going to be willing to lend to as a ratio. If the monthly payment for something is going to be too high as a percentage of what your monthly revenues are, or in the case of personal credit, with your monthly income is, then it's too close. Because if there's any drop in the revenues, right, in the income, you won't be able to pay back this new thing. So you can see why that's so important. That's also 30%. Now, how long have you had credit? You may have all heard this when you were much younger, that, because you haven't had credit for a very long time, it's harder to get certain kinds of credit. That is a thing that seems to change cyclically. I'm 51, and I remember when I was 19, on the college campus, the community college I was attending in California, there were department stores and banks just like handing out credit cards. I mean, it felt like they were just handing them out with like $1,000 limits. Not much, $1,000 limit though, to a 19-year-old kid who at that time was delivering pizzas. So, and then stuff happens in the economy, and then all the lenders get all conservative again, and then they won't do that anymore, right? I know someone who was at the height of the craziness surrounding mortgages in the mid-aughts. In 2007, she was offered a loan for a house that was, when she was, I think she said she was making $40,000 a year, and she could have got a loan for a $700,000 house because they were just giving away the money in that sense, you know, even though she was young, you know, at the time. So how long have you had credit? That's 15%. It matters. It goes into it. If you add those three things up, now you're at 70, 65, 80% of your score is based on past payment history, outstanding debt, and how long have you had credit. Only 20% of it is new applications for credit and types of credit. Vantage score, they don't give a number, but you can see how they judge this, how they score this. Past payment history, extremely influential. It's the only category that is extremely influential. Age and type of credit, percent of your credit used, right? That's a little bit like the outstanding debt. How much credit do you have available to you? Is your credit card maximum $10,000? And is the balance on it $7,000 or is the balance on it $2,000? Right, that matters. Also, total balances and debt. Right? You see that there, moderately influential. Okay.
The question. So on the FICO part, let's explain a little bit. So types of credit. For example, if you have all credit card debt, you don't get as high a score as if you have a term note debt, like a mortgage or a car loan that has term on it, or a personal line of credit. How long have you had credit? Some people, when they're trying to clean up their credit, they go and pay off their credit cards, and that's not always the best thing to do. You may want to pay it down, but don't close it, because that having it for a period of time, 5 years or 7 years, adds value to your credit score. I will tell you, I sold a home a few years ago. And so when I sold the home, my credit score went down because for a while I didn't have a mortgage payment and my credit score dumped. Because I didn't have a car payment and all I had was a mortgage and credit cards. And so it dropped. I will tell you, in the last 6 months, I was getting ready to, I just moved into a new home in December. So I was getting prepared to buy a home in November, but the home that I had, I wasn't selling it yet. I still needed to do some work on it. So what I did was, to qualify, I paid off all of my debt. My credit score went up to like 790. And then what happened, I got into the home, everything looked great, but now I had this other home I needed to sell. So when I got into the new home, I went to the department stores and I accepted credit cards to buy new appliances and new furniture and stuff, because I'm still going to sell my house. And when I sell my house, I'm going to pay it back off. But in the meantime, my credit score went down from like 790 to 720 because I went to the furniture stores and the appliance stores and I got new credit. And so, and you know, I kind of chuckled because I knew kind of what was going to happen. However, and I knew I was going to be able to pay them off quickly, but I watched it fall like 70 points because I didn't have a mortgage and I went and got new credit. So it really does fluctuate and quickly.
And that was in a period of, what was that, about 2 months?
Yeah, it was like within like from November to, and it's still going because the house hasn't closed yet. So yeah. I'm still, I still have Home Depot for home improvements. I still have the furniture place where I get all furniture. So it hasn't gone back up, but it's leveled out.
Right.
But yeah, that's so say over a period of like from November to April.
Yeah. Okay, so about 6 months, right? And so what that also tells us is, if it can go down that quickly, because of the stuff that he's doing, the stuff that's going on with him financially, it means it could also go up quickly, depending on what you're doing financially and what you get going, right?
And luckily I had a high enough credit score that I could weather
Yeah,
the decline. So,
right,
but so if I had started off at 680 and made these moves and went down to 610, then I couldn't go
right,
get a car.
right, right.
I
And
couldn't
this
get
is, yeah,
furniture. I couldn't get anything.
yeah. And so it's very important. Yeah, when this happens, when something happens where it has to reduce, it's better to have this cushion where you've got it as high as possible, and so it doesn't get reduced. But it's also, but there's the encouragement here for me is that there are things that you can do to get it up pretty fast too. It depends on your circumstances and what you're able to do, but it is possible, right? It is possible, and that's I think the lesson, the other half of the lesson here is that it can go down quickly depending on what's going on, even if things are actually good, right? Ken's a
Yeah.
successful guy. He's got a good job. He's got a steady income, the whole thing. It still went down 70 points because of the stuff that he's doing financially. And so it may seem unfair that it goes down, but that's the model, right? The people who give credit are using this model to score you, and the model doesn't capture the full picture. The model only captures these numbers, and they are meant as a reflection. They act as a kind of abstraction of the full picture, and that's all they can go on, right? Because they don't have time to get to know everybody personally, right? And when they're assigning a score, they don't have time to get into Ken's business and Ken's life and get to know him and go, oh, okay, yeah, no, we shouldn't lower his score. I mean, this is happening. This all makes sense. They don't have time for that. All they have is the numbers, and they present that abstraction of you, right, as a person who pays back stuff and who borrows and pays back and borrows and pays back. That's what it's based on.
I'll add, and so know that then too, when we're talking about planning and access to capital, if you know you're getting ready to make a move, plan accordingly.
Mhm.
If you know you got a couple of credit cards out there you need to pay down, get that part taken care of before you go to the bank and start looking for, do the best you can to present yourself in the best possible light.
So, excellent credit is for low risk borrowers. What's a low risk borrower? That's a person who they believe is going to pay it back. How do they decide to believe? Based on the past payment history, right? As we saw, that's the biggest component of the credit score, right? And that means they'll give you a better interest rate and you have better terms and things like that. Now, even if you have poor credit, you could still be approved for a loan or some kind of financing, but the interest rates might be high because they're going to consider you a higher risk. So now, keeping up with your personal credit report, he asked the question, how many of you are tracking your credit? So I'll assume that means you're tracking it, quarterly or something like that. Some people get very particular about it and very diligent about it. And they're checking it every month. That's not a bad thing to do. Now, here's the annual credit report. Oh, I thought it was freecreditreport.com. So it's www.annualcreditreport.com. You can get one free personal credit report every 12 months from each of the 3 major credit reporting agencies. I would count this workshop successful if everybody here who has not got a credit report in the last 12 months goes out and in the next 2 weeks has one from Equifax, TransUnion, and Experian. That's what I want to get you to do from this. From my whole goal from this is to get you, if you have not ever seen it, or if you have not had one in the last 12 months, is to get you to go to that website. That's why I'm doing this. Yeah, we're going to talk about other interesting stuff. Ken's here to talk about it from the banker's point of view. My goal is for you in the next 2 weeks to 1 month, have that in your hands from each one of them. And if you got questions, you can get in touch with me and we can talk about it. If you're willing to share information with me and talk about it. All right. Okay. So now get your reports regularly, review them for accuracy. Yes, they make mistakes. They make a lot of mistakes because they're dealing with millions of people and data, and there are similar names. You have John H. Smith and you have John A. Smith. And on the phone, sometimes H will sound like A. So somebody wrote something down, it gets all tangled up, it gets all twisted, and all of a sudden data from John H. Smith ends up on John A. Smith's credit report. And John A. Smith's social security number is 353124489, and the other one is 353124488. Sometimes that happens more often than you think, right? So there will be mistakes. These are honest mistakes. It's just a data entry error. Somebody misheard something, somebody mistyped something. That's the problem, right? If you are not looking at these regularly, you will not detect the report. You will not detect the error. If the error happens in April and you are checking your stuff, let's say every 2 months, the latest you will notice some sort of error, right? May, June, April, May, June. Yeah, June. But if you're not checking this with frequency, in particular, if you're a business owner, if you're not checking this with frequency, you may not see it until November, December. You may not see it until you are going to go look for financing or some sort of credit for your business. And by then, it's been on there for 4, 5, 6 months. Okay, so check them regularly. Here's some tips for credit disputes. Now, you can get information from the Federal Trade Commission as well. I'm going to mention that a little bit more later. Provide copies of anything when you are trying to get something corrected, let's say at Experian. Don't send your originals or anything like that. Send your disputes to the credit reporting agencies and the creditors, right? Request a new credit report to verify that the correction was made. And even then, you could end up on mailing lists of like marketing lists that are bought and sold, right? Because one time you bought something. I'm not saying this is a negative thing, but just to give you an example of how stuff can persist. I'm now 51. This goes back to when I was less than 25, because I remember where I was living and who my roommates were and everything. And someone made an error on something and I ended up as David L. Hincapie. Middle initial L. I don't have a middle name. That has followed me through my life. Even leaving California, joining the Army, going overseas, coming back, being stationed in Korea, being stationed in New York, coming back to California, moving around California, moving to DC. I'm in my second place in DC now. I don't live where I lived originally. And even now that I've moved, every now and then I get an offer. I think it's Discover. I've never had a Discover car. I get an offer from Discover addressed to David L. Hincapie. I ended up on some kind of marketing list and I'll get offers to David L. Hincapie. There's a couple of other things. It doesn't happen as frequently now, but we're talking about 27 years ago. And that little thing is following me. Now, it's not a negative thing. I'm telling you that as an example of how stuff will follow you. It's not on my credit report, although I did one time have to correct something on my credit report related to that, but it wasn't a negative thing. But imagine if it's a negative thing and you don't fix it. This thing has been following me around to somewhere. I'm David L. Hincapie. I don't have a middle name. All right. So you want to be in touch with this information. You want to be aware. The Fair Credit Reporting Act and the Accurate Credit Transaction Acts. These are laws designed to protect you and control how credit reporting can be done and what it can be done for, right? And as it says here, there's regulations for personal credit bureau reporting. For what purpose can a lender or a business obtain your personal credit report, right? and when do you need to give permission, your rights to see your personal credit report and everything. All this stuff is designed to protect you and make this more transparent, the way this happens. Let me admit someone into the room. Here's a sample personal credit report. This is what something might look like here. Potentially negative items. It has the information there. Accounts in good standing has the information there. Public records listed. There are none for this person. Requests for credit history. If you applied for credit, say for a Visa card, it's going to be listed there. Employers, it's going to list some employers, things like this, right? This is not everything you're going to find in an actual personal credit report, and they're not going to look exactly like this, but it's going to be like this. Now, some of the information in there, you may not understand what some of the abbreviations are. You may not understand what some of the words mean. You can go online to find out about them. You can ask for information from the Credit Reporting Bureau on it and clear it up, right? You can go to some of the SBA resource partners as well and ask them about it, because they have experience looking at these things as well. In particular, I would say the SBA mentor, the SCORE mentors, because they're business owners. So some practices for building a healthy, strong personal credit history and a good, healthy credit score. So maintain healthy credit, as it says, pay your stuff on time. Pay your stuff on time. That, like we know now, that is the big thing. Now keep outstanding revolving debt balances low. So the key here, the number here is 30%. Keep your balances under 30%, right? So if your limit for some credit card is, say, $10,000, keep it under $3,000, the balance. Don't let it go higher than that, right? Keep it under 30%. You will know that you're doing a good job at this, because one of the first things that they're going to want to do is raise your limit. That happened to me. I mean, it's happened to me several times where, it goes up. I went on vacation, I bought some things, whatever. And, I get up to around 50, sometimes 60%, and then I get it back down. And as soon as I get it back down, I start getting credit offers from other people, from like this Discover card that I mentioned that I've never had, right? As soon as I get under it, within a month, I start getting credit offers, or from just other credit card companies offering me, 0% if you transfer the balance. Come over here, come over here, come over here, right? I got it down under 30% in my revolving balances. I don't have a car, so I don't have a car payment anymore. So that's really where most of my variable credit is in revolving accounts. Now, pay off outstanding collection accounts and other debts, right? If you have anything in collections, get into a plan for it and try to pay it off as fast as you can, right? Come to some agreement, come to some settlement. You can negotiate it with the creditor, right? Every now and then they'll say, look, you owe us $1,000. If you pay 500 today, the whole thing is, okay. That could help you. You want to avoid negative events that could result in public records, such as a bankruptcy or foreclosure or a judgment against you or anything like that. Here it is, 45-day window. Comparison shop for major loans within a 45-day window, because that's the window in which, if you are checking for the same sort of credit, you're not going to be penalized for having too many hits, as they say, on your credit. So don't close older accounts in good standing. If you're in good standing with it and it's available and you're not using it, leave it there. The age of it and the fact that you've had it, it's a kind of reflection of, as Ken said, your character, right? Keeping balances low, having these accounts in good standing for a long period of time says something about you. What it says about you is that you have some discipline, right? If you have a $50,000 credit limit, say on a credit card, but you never have more than $6,000 on it that you have to pay back, that says something about you. It says you could go and run up a credit card bill of $50,000, but you never do. You have discipline, right? Says something about your character, as Ken was saying,
David, question for you. It's
Yeah.
5:32, and you have some good questions
Mhm.
in the chat. I want to make sure
Okay.
that that you allow time to respond to a couple of those.
Okay. So, oh, they're in the chat. Okay. So I was looking for,
And
uh,
Monique Hunter, you have your hand raised. Is that raised to have a question, or that was just yes? I checked my credit.
I think that was from when we asked her. Right. So
While
I'm
you're
gonna lower.
looking,
Yeah.
one of the questions was, what do you recommend? They're asking me, but I'm going to ask the expert.
Okay.
Uh, how do you feel about these credit monitoring companies? And the one that was thrown into the chat was like, for example, like Credit Karma.
So I have never used one of these because I got in the habit of getting mine every year, right? And so I know what's out there on me, right? I know it hasn't. I mean, it's not like I'm applying for a bunch of stuff and forgetting about it, right? I'm not getting a bunch of credit and then forgetting about it. No, I have it every year. Here it is. That's what's going on. I know what my financial situation is. My financial situation is the stuff that I owe is student loans and credit cards. That's student loans and credit cards. That's what I got. That's what I owe back, right? That hasn't really changed in a lot of years, right? That's what because I don't have a car anymore, right? I live in the city now, so I'm a carless person, right? So I don't worry about this anymore. So it can monitor against identity theft. And so if you feel that that service is worth it for you, shop around and see what exactly they're offering. One thing I will say, when you're talking to them, first, I'm never comfortable with anything like this if I can't talk to a human being. Any service that's going to sell it to me and only going to give it to me online and not let me talk to a person, I get suspicious. Maybe you don't. I do. I want to talk to a person. I want my questions answered. I'm going to give you some money for a service. I want to know what's in it. I don't know about this Credit Karma. I don't know nothing about them because I've never used them. I've never had a need for them.
I'll share. I actually, and I'm usually not a very technology kind of person, but I do actually have Credit Karma.
Oh,
And,
okay.
and because of the Credit Karma, that's how I'm able to manage what my credit score looks like from a monthly basis.
Yeah.
And that's when I told myself, stop using that credit. That's I can say, oh, stop using that credit card, use this one, or pay this one off. Okay, pay that little one off. So that has been what has allowed me to actually manage this whole process that I explained to you guys over the last 6 months. So I can see when stuff has been paid off. I can see how much I have outstanding in student loans. I can see how much I have in mortgages versus credit card versus term debt. And so for someone like me who's usually oblivious, it helps me like really stay on target.
Now here's another option. Now the thing is I am aware of it with a little less detail than he is monthly because my credit cards do it. They don't, it's not a credit report, but they tell me my score. So I've got two, got a Visa, I've got an American Express. Both of them will tell me my score. So then if I'm not worried about that kind of that LifeLock service where I'm terrified of identity theft or everything like that, then the only thing that it matters for me is, can I check it monthly? And since I can check it monthly with my credit cards, they give me a credit score. And I get my 3 reports every year. I don't need it. I have enough information. You may decide you need it depending on what you're doing. I'm not doing anything where I feel I need it. So I'm not going to pay for it.
So I will say, and I'm not, I use that's the only one I have. And then I have something else I signed up where that whenever I open up a new credit card or something, I get a notification. Actually, I get 3 notifications saying so and so has inquired, keeps me on track. So I think it keeps me. I'm a guy that was when I was in my 20s and 30s who did not have great credit. And so
Amen.
I pride myself on having great credit. And now that I'm in my older years, so it really helps me make sure I stay on top of things, I don't make a mistake.
Yeah.
Especially when you're doing things like if you're going out looking for business loans, or if you're going out looking to buy a house, or student loans for kids and stuff like that. It's Whatever tool, if you're good at reconciling on a monthly basis based on your monthly statements are coming in, whatever your style is, I would say monthly, annually may not be enough for some of us who are moving very rapidly and making financial decisions on a regular basis. So another question that was in here I thought was interesting was, can you negotiate? I guess the question was actually, can you negotiate delinquent? Can we negotiate a negative mark on the organization, especially if under 200? I will say you can negotiate, but at some point, lenders may say, when they're looking at it, depending on how in-depth they go into this, they may say, okay, that means you're taking people, and if you owe them $1,000, you're really not giving them the $1,000 back. So then how I'm going to consider that in my decision as to whether or not I'm going to provide credit to you. If you've gone and negotiated yourself out of your actual debt, that may be a variable that I look at. How often do I actually have that conversation? Not often, but I've had it. Especially if it's a big number. If it shows up on your credit report or your taxes, because if you negotiate big ticket items, it doesn't necessarily show on your credit report as much as it shows on your taxes, because then you have to pay tax. You have to pay the taxes on that, and that raises a red flag for the credit folks. What is this source of income that's reporting on here? And that's because whatever the bank is forgiving, you're reporting that as income on your tax return. Bet you didn't know that.
Yeah. It's funny that you mentioned the 200, because I remember 106. I'm still annoyed by it. And this is 15 years ago, 13 years ago. There's a $168 cell phone dispute where they screwed up, and I could not get a person to listen to me. And I was in the Army, and I wasn't in California. I was in Korea, and getting on the phone with people meant getting up at 2 a.m. or something. And, so I could call the number and argue with these people on the phone. And it was going to turn into a collection, because from my point of view at the time, these people, that's not the word I was using in my head, it started with an A, ended with an S, were stalling, and they were taking too much damn time. And I just okay, so if this goes to collections, it's going to affect me. And I don't want that, because now I was that guy just like Ken, right? It was not very good in my 20s, in my early 30s, and I decided to make it better. And I just didn't want to deal with it. And I thought, okay, you know what? It's $168 with these jerks. I'll just give it to them. Not everybody's in a situation. Maybe you're in a position where 168 is just too much money and you can't give it up. I don't know what you're in. I don't know what, but you got to make that decision. For me, in that time, I thought, all right, screw it. I don't want to fight with them anymore. I was right, they were wrong.
Yeah, I can tell you how many times that I've seen really small ticket items really negatively impact someone's credit report. And these are the 3 things that are usually on there: a cell phone dispute, an unpaid doctor's bill, or a cable TV dispute. And so I'm like, man, your credit report is jacked up by you down in the 600s because you just didn't figure out how to get rid of. And for $300, you can go down there and take care of this week, and your credit score would jump up 100 points if you just go take care of these. Yeah. So yeah, make a decision. What's best for you? But if an unpaid cell phone bill that wasn't really yours is messing up your credit report, bite the bullet.
Yeah, and I still remember the amount, and I remember the company, and it still pisses me off, but I was like, no, I'm turning a new leaf. I'm getting better at this. I'm going to be better. I'm going to have a better credit score, blah, blah, blah. I can't fight with these people anymore. Right?
My quote that I usually give this quote is usually in reference to reporting income on your tax return, but it also applies to taking care of minor issues on your credit report. Make sure that you're always in a position to maximize your growth potential and minimize your liability. So if paying $300 gets you access to $500,000, have that conversation with yourself.
Yeah.
If this $500 is going to keep you from going to the bank and getting $250 so that you can get that new contract, have that conversation with yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. So discussing here personal versus business credit reports. I want to give you a quick overview of this. All right. So it's very similar to the personal one, the business one. The major players in this are going to be Dun & Bradstreet, Equifax, and Experian Business. Each one of them has a slightly different focus. Dun & Bradstreet, how your business interacts with vendors and suppliers. Trade credit, because, for example, when your vendors tell you, well, you can pay us in 45 days instead of in 2 weeks, that's credit, right? They're not charging interest, but they're extending this to you. They're saying this, right? And this is beneficial to your business because it improves your cash flow, right? And now, how you interact with vendors and suppliers, that trade credit performance, that's what Dun & Bradstreet looks at, right? Equifax, how your business has managed business lines of credit and loans, right? And then Experian Business says here, focus on credit information from both lenders and business vendors. So they're trying to balance the two. These are the three that exist in this world. What do business credit reports contain, right? The identifying information of the business, the registration, financial information, public record information, and then this business credit history, right? Companies that have granted credit, payment data from suppliers or creditors, risk scores and ratings, that sort of thing. It's very similar to a personal one. There are regulations that do not apply to business credit. That the ones that we mentioned earlier for personal credit are different, but they have procedures in place for the following things here, right? You can manage disputes with them as well, and you should, right? When you get to that point, I assume most of the people here are new businesses under 3 years. So the credit scores are created by the business credit reporting agencies, just like the personal credit. They have these models, they use them, right? It's very similar. It works the same way. But again, this is not going to happen until you've been in business for a little while. Now, checking your business credit report. You should check it to make sure that it's accurate, just as you do with your personal. You can create an account with Dun & Bradstreet to access your credit report, basic information. There's no obligation for this to be free. You're not going to be given one free one every year necessarily from the different sources because the same laws don't apply for business credit, right? Why should I establish business credit? Well, we've been talking about it this whole thing, right? It determines approval, terms of financing, everything there, prices of insurance policies, and it helps evaluate your ability to execute government contracts, because we know there's a lot of people here who are in that field here, right? Now, having good business credit as well helps you get the trade credit, for example, granting, as it says here, a deferral of payment for goods and services. If you have with your vendors, you don't have to pay them right away. It could help your business cash flow if you don't have to pay it in the next 2 weeks, if you can take 45 days or 30 days to pay, right? This is very normal in businesses. It's very standard, but you're only going to get these good relationships if you have good business credit. Basics here, you have to have an EIN, business credit report, verify if you already have one, for example, if you've been around, say, more than 3 years. These are things that you should do. No, best practices for strong business credit. It's going to be very similar. I mean, almost identical to the personal credit, right? Pay the loans, bills, and taxes on time. Make sure the business is visible. Have good relationships with your suppliers and vendors, right? Important thing here, separate personal and business finances. Separate them. If you're operating as a sole proprietor, I recommend you stop that as soon as you possibly can, because if your personal and business finances are too tangled up, it's hard for someone who is going to evaluate a credit application to evaluate it. They don't know, if they can't see how much money the business is producing, right? And how profitable it is, because it's too tangled. Let's say you're still working at some job with a salary. If they can't see it, then what's the difference here? They don't know. So you have to separate them. It's better to create a business entity that allows you to separate them this way. Okay. So how lenders evaluate your credit worthiness, all right? Everything we've been saying has been telling you how lenders evaluate your credit worthiness. So this is going to be some repetition here. Take the credit history. They're always talking about the 5 C's, right? Or 4 C's, depending on who's saying. Capacity, collateral, credit history, character, in this case, conditions, right? The biggest piece is the credit history. Collateral, yes, collateral matters. But if Ken is your small business lender and there's a bunch of collateral, when Ken is doing his credit analysis and he's looking for sources of repayment, the primary source of repayment is cash flow of the business. Yes, he wants to have collateral, but if you can't pay back the loan and he has to take the collateral to get repaid, it means he has to take the collateral and then go sell it. And that's a big giant hassle. And he doesn't want to do that. He'd rather just get the cash. Cash is king. Cash is the primary source of repayment. In the credit analysis, a lot of lenders do in the credit memo, they mark this primary source of repayment. What's this? Secondary source of repayment. It's going to be this. Tertiary source of repayment. It's going to be this. This is how we're going to get repaid. First thing is going to be cash, the cash flow of the business. How much does it generate, right? So collateral, that's why that's not as important. Capacity to pay is, the cash flow of the business. How much is it producing? Conditions, character. They're going to judge your character by looking at your personal credit. That's the only judge they really have. I mean, everybody's going to try to make a good impression when you meet someone in person. You're not going to be able to judge your character from that. You're going to judge your character based on your personal credit, right? So there you go. Non-traditional credit data, new and growing in use. This is stuff we haven't mentioned before. This is approaches like that one nonprofit lender that I told you about, that they changed their lending model and their credit decisions because they realized that credit scores just did it for their market, for the people they were lending to. It didn't really help them. What was a better predictor of repayment was being current on the revolving credit and the car loan. That's non-traditional, right? What is non-traditional data? It talks about it here, right? Personal credit reporting examples, utilities, telephone services, rental data. Business credit reporting samples are things like online business reviews, shipment volume, e-commerce, and merchant account transactions. I actually don't know how many entities are using non-traditional credit data. I've read articles that it's being used more, but I actually don't know. A typical SBA 7A lender, I don't know if any even do that, but it is out there. So different lenders have different priorities for different things, right? So underwriting is, just so you know this term, if you don't already, underwriting is that process of doing the credit analysis and examining how the business will repay, and then doing all the administrative stuff to make sure that the loan, the contract, is a legally enforceable contract, and everything is in order, so that if something has to happen, if they have to go and get the collateral because you didn't pay, or if this has to, or something else happens to happen, it can all happen. That's the underwriting. It's that whole process that the lender does to make sure that the applicant meets the standards that they need, and therefore they can do the loan, right? I suspect Ken might have a more succinct way of saying it, that because he's an actual lender. That's how I think about it.
Going to add that, as with a lot of the information that David has provided, if there's additional opportunities for us to do more training for you, just send me an email.
Yeah.
I will say, in reference to access to capital and underwriting, we are doing a financial series starting in July. And it's going to include access to capital, investments, insurance, and all that kind of stuff. And so we'll be going into all of this in great detail. And David, you had a couple more questions in the chat.
I see
And
when
we have you're coming up on 6 o'clock.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So the
yeah, this is I'm going through these pretty fast because this is 48, and I think it only goes up to, I think, 54. You know, so. So one of the questions here, best practices, promoting reputation. Any thoughts on best practices with regard to testimonials from clients, customers? To what degree do financial institutions and potential primes, one would like to consider such?
Not really.
Yeah, because contractors are not, that's not retail, right? Your reputation, you're talking about something like your reputation with customers in retail, right? Things like you see on Yelp and reviews and things like that. If you're doing contracting with a prime contractor and you're doing a subcontract, they're going to want to know about your track record. And they're going to want to know about what you've done in the past, what other subcontracts you've done in the past, and your performance there. In a sense, that's like the credit history. So you're talking about something different there. That's not really talking about credit here. What you're talking about is how you can show that you can do what the subcontract requires you to do.
So probably include that, some of that testimonial stuff in your capabilities study.
Yeah. So if previous ones are willing to be contacted, that could be useful.
On the 5 C's of credit, that character thing now really relates to giving full disclosure and not having your lenders find out things in the process, i.e. they're 5 weeks in the process, they run your credit report and find out you had a bankruptcy or something. So that's a big piece on character. And then also know that one thing that a lot of financial institutions are doing now, they're doing background checks on public records. So if you know you had an arrest or something, or a DWI or something, you may want to disclose that up front and not have them find out at the back end. Especially if we're doing SBA loans and we check, it's a criminal history background check thingy that you got to do. And so you want to make sure you disclose that information up front. And that's what we're looking at as far as character. The honesty and please know, we know that stuff happens all over the place. There's nothing that happens that we haven't seen that we don't see on a daily basis. So don't think, oh my God, I'm embarrassed about this. I can't. No, we've seen it and heard it all. So I just don't want to be surprised. I don't want to be 2 months into the process to find it out. Tell me up front.
You want to think about the person you're talking to about credit a little bit the way you do when you go to the doctor. You know how with the doctor in the beginning, you might be a little bit embarrassed about something, telling them about something, but it's a doctor. Trust me, the doctor has seen it all. There's nothing you're going to say to the doctor that's going to surprise him. No, in fact, I was with some friends who were doctors. We were laughing about this recently. Somebody brought something up. It was a little bit embarrassing, and it's a couple, a husband and wife, who said, we're not going to be embarrassed. It's not going to gross us out, nothing like that. We've seen it all. Don't worry. Well, Ken, the lender, has seen everything. Whatever embarrassing, crazy situation that you got yourself involved in financially, he has seen it. It's better to just talk about it, bring it up and go like, this happened, right?
Yeah.
It's, it's better than finding it out at the end, or finding out towards the end. No surprises. So, I mean, that's the summary. Like I said, my goal here is to tell you a little bit about all that stuff. You can find out more. You can go to the FTC, ftc.gov, the Federal Trade Commission, to find out information there. Just look at whatever they have on identity theft, because that's connected to credit as well. Just do a search there, ftc.gov, Federal Trade Commission, ftc.gov, and go to that annualcreditreport.com. Like I said, my goal is everyone on this call, if you do not have a credit report from the last 12 months, go get them. Like tonight, go do it, or this week, Saturday, take a little bit of time. It doesn't take long. You go on there and you get all 3 of them. And then if you find something that frightens you, scares you, or surprises you, go to one of the SCORE mentors and ask for some help. Ask them to explain something to you. Get in touch with the credit reporting bureau to get an explanation about what's going on. Call them up. You might have to be on hold for a little bit and say, hey, I want an explanation on this. I just saw this. I don't understand it. Please help me. If you want to get in touch with me personally, I'm happy to talk about it. I'll help in any way I can. I'm going to put my email address up here again.
Yeah, I'm doing the same. I forgot about that. I'm doing it right now. David, I have another question for you.
Sure.
Too. Okay, what is this? I think I did it right. Someone asked a question in the chat, and it's a very interesting question. Wanted to know, when you're talking about business credit, I think the question was, how do you access business credit? And so I want you to also, when you say that, I am going to say, as a lender, I've never checked a business credit report.
Oh, wow.
So I'm going to say that. I've been doing this for 30 years. The only time I've ever looked at, once upon a time, I used to check Dun and Bradstreet. That's only because I was doing some stuff with the SBA. And at that point, I was doing the SBA pre-qual program, and you had to have a DMB number, and you had to look at the DMB. Yeah. Other than that, and I'm going to tell you, this is who I worked for in my career. I worked for Bank of America. I worked for M&T Bank. I worked for a credit union. I worked for Sandy Spring Bank, and I worked for Provident Bank, and I worked for Revere Bank. Never in any, I wouldn't even know. We don't report, and I don't know how to pull it. So I just want to put that out there. I just want to say, I want to put that out there.
Yeah, we mention it because everyone asks, right? People always ask about the business credit, because I suspect there are some people who think that, let's say you have because there are people like this. There are people who are a mess in their private finances, and they have an LLC, a separate business, the finances don't mix, and they're geniuses with that, right? And they're doing, I don't know, 10 million a year in revenue, right?
Right.
So it's a decently sized small business, but they are a disaster. They personally. And
so I'm thinking probably, so I've always been small business and SBA. So I'm thinking maybe your JB Chase or whatever, the guys that have like the big companies that are bringing in 20 million, 25 million, 100 million. I'm sure they're pulling DNBs and business. But I'm dealing with the average guy that's coming in with $1 million or less. I even have clients that have like 3 million in revenue. But I have never worked in a division where and I say that because I don't want everybody to be really nervous, right, and go out and say, oh my God, I have to have a business credit report. And
I don't have a lot of data points, but the 3 people I can remember really talking to me about this in a conversation, what it turned out was they had moderately successful businesses they were seeking to grow, and they were in their personal finances a complete disaster. And what they were trying to do was try to avoid having their personal credit affect financing, because they knew that their business was super profitable and super good, and it looked really great. And they were thinking, well, I shouldn't be penalized. But the problem is,
I had that very conversation as recently as last week. And I'm like, they're not separate. You can't, I had to say to them, for one, we're going to pull your personal. For two, I don't pull business. And so you're not going to get around,
You can't get around it.
can't get
Until,
around.
like you said, until that business is making 75, 80, 90, 100 million a year, they're going to want to know, right? So there you go. So it's necessary for you to know about this, but the important thing is that your personal credit is going to be the most important thing here. Go get those credit reports, see what's on them, and don't be afraid of it. You know, I mean, my credit only started getting better. If you're in a situation where it's bad, I got to tell you, it only started getting better when I decided to just go, all right, because the thing is, it's a scorecard that tells you how flaky or not flaky you have been. And I know, you know, sometimes it's not flakiness, right? There's people get laid off, people get sick, I understand. In my case, I knew it was flakiness. I didn't get sick, I didn't get laid off. I was just an irresponsible 28-year-old. I was an idiot. And I didn't want to have to look at that record and history of my irresponsibility. But then finally I sucked it up and I was like, all right, I got to do this. So I looked at it. I was ashamed in front of myself, to myself. But then I got on top of it and now I'm okay. But that's the beginning. So go do it. All right. So, hey,
you ask any questions?
Yeah.
You've gotten a lot of thank yous and bravos and gratitude for a great job done in the chat. So this is our part 2 of 3. So what are we looking forward to in part 3?
I will be honest and say I can't remember because I'm doing 3 of these series at once and I can't remember what's next, like with different organizations. I can't remember what our next one is.
We'll get it out. We'll get it out to you.
Okay. Yeah.
Trying to see if I had the flyer in front of me, but I don't. Okay.
So everyone,
but we will. But it is same bat channel, same bat time.
Yep.
2 weeks from today.
Yeah. And you got my email addresses. Any questions on this or anything else about the SBA or small business or anything like that, just send me an email. Let me know where we connected so I can remember.
I put mine out there too. So look forward to seeing all of you next time.
All right.
Thank you. Great job. Whole lot of information.
Thank you, guys.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Angeletta, are you a banker?
No, I'm not. It's Angelita. It actually let me come off of sharing video. I am not a banker, but I'm a 63-year-old senior most of my life in corporate America. And
great comments.
thank you. I'm using this whole COVID thing to reinvent myself. So I'm going to start a business that's going to bring jobs and betterment to my community, basically.
Great. So, yeah, great questions today. I was like,
thank you.
That's a good work. All right, everybody.
Okay.
Talk to you later.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Melissa. See you later.